The metallic click of the storage room lock, echoing through the empty hallway, made Emma Chen's heart stop. She pressed her ear against the cold steel door, listening to the muffled laughter growing fainter as footsteps retreated down the corridor. The musty smell of cleaning supplies and forgotten textbooks surrounded her in the pitch-black space, but it wasn't the darkness that made her pulse race. It was the realization that this wasn't an accident. At Lincoln Valley High, Emma had perfected the art of invisibility. 5 feet 2 inches of careful camouflage, always clutching books like a shield, eyes downcast behind wire-rimmed glasses that had belonged to her grandmother. Her oversized sweaters hung loose enough to hide her frame, and she moved through hallways like a ghost, timing her routes to avoid the popular crowds. For 3 years, this strategy had worked. She attended classes, earned perfect grades, and went home without incident. But somehow, she'd ended up on their radar anyway. The them in question was Madison Parker's crew. Madison ruled the junior class with the kind of effortless cruelty that came from never facing real consequences. Tall, blonde, and backed by her father's position on the school board, she collected followers like trophies. Her lieutenant, Jessica Torres, was all sharp edges and sharper tongue, while the muscle came from Tyler Brooks and his best friend King Mitchell, both varsity football players who treated smaller students like training dummies. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emma had first noticed their attention 3 weeks ago during lunch period. She'd been sitting alone in the corner of the cafeteria, working on calculus homework while eating a sandwich her mother had packed, when Madison's voice had cut through the ambient noise. "Look at little mouse girl, all alone again. Doesn't she have any friends?" The comment had been followed by giggles from her table, but Emma had kept her head down, pretending not to hear. That had been her first mistake. In Madison's world, ignoring her was the same as challenging her. The incidents had started small. Books knocked from Emma's hands in the hallway, always with fake apologies and innocent smiles when teachers were watching. Her locker had been accidentally slammed shut on her fingers twice. During gym class, Jessica had made sure Emma was always picked last for teams, then ensured she spent most of the period running laps for various imaginary infractions. Each event was carefully calculated to stay just below the threshold that would trigger adult intervention. Emma's parents had immigrated from Taiwan when she was 5, bringing with them a deep respect for education and authority. When she'd tried to explain the situation at home, her mother had offered the same advice she'd given for every childhood problem. Work harder, be more polite, and don't cause trouble. Her father, exhausted from double shifts at the electronics repair shop, had simply patted her shoulder and suggested she focus on her studies. They didn't understand that sometimes working harder only painted a bigger target on your back. What they also didn't understand was how Emma spent her free time. While other teenagers were scrolling social media or binge-watching Netflix, Emma was hunched over her computer playing strategic warfare games. She discovered military simulations. When she was 12, initially drawn to the puzzle-like nature of resource management and tactical planning. What started as curiosity had evolved into obsession. She studied Sun Tzu's Art of War alongside her chemistry textbook, analyzed famous military campaigns with the same intensity she brought to mathematical proofs, and spent weekends competing in online strategy tournaments under the username Silent Storm. Her bedroom walls were covered with maps marking famous battles, hand-drawn diagrams of successful military tactics, and printed articles about psychological warfare strategies. She understood concepts like information asymmetry, force multiplication, and the value of terrain advantage. But none of her classmates suspected that the quiet girl who stammered when called on in English class could orchestrate complex virtual battles, involving thousands of units and multiple theaters of operation. The storage room trap had been Madison's Most ambitious plan yet. Emma had been called to the main office during fifth period, supposedly because of a scheduling conflict with her advanced placement courses. When she'd arrived, the secretary had looked confused and claimed no one had requested her presence. On her way back to class, Tyler had appeared in the hallway, claiming he'd found her lost textbook near the storage room behind the gymnasium. Emma had hesitated, knowing something felt wrong, but Tyler had seemed genuine in his concern, even offering to carry her backpack. The moment she'd stepped into the storage room to retrieve the supposedly lost book, the door had slammed shut. Behind her, through the small window, she'd seen Madison's face appear, phone camera recording, while Jessica and Kane laughed in the background. "Hope you're comfortable in there, mouse girl," Madison had called through the door. "Maybe this will teach you to be more social. We'll come back for you eventually, maybe." Now sitting in the darkness, Emma felt something shift inside her chest. The familiar flutter of anxiety was still there, but underneath it, something colder and more calculating was awakening. She pulled out her phone, noting she had 2 bars of signal and a nearly full battery. The storage room itself was approximately 8 feet by 12 feet. She estimated, with shelving units along 3 walls and cleaning equipment stored in the corners. Most importantly, she could hear voices and footsteps in the hallway outside, which meant this area saw regular traffic. Madison's crew had made several tactical errors already. They'd chosen a location too close to main foot traffic patterns. They'd failed to confiscate her phone. And most critically, they'd underestimated their target's capability for strategic thinking. Emma's fingers moved quickly across her phone screen as she began implementing a plan that would turn their carefully laid trap into their worst nightmare. The shy girl they thought they'd cornered was about to show them what a real tactical genius looked like when she stopped playing defense and went on the attack. Emma's fingers moved across her phone screen with the precision of a chess grandmaster, contemplating their next move. The darkness of the storage room had become her command center, and what Madison's crew had intended as a prison was transforming into a strategic advantage. She opened her notes app and began documenting everything, timestamps, voices she could identify through the door, footstep patterns in the hallway outside. Information was ammunition, and she intended to arm herself thoroughly. The first phase of her plan required patience, something her online opponents had learned to fear. In her virtual campaigns, Emma was known for her willingness to sacrifice immediate gains for long-term strategic positioning. While other players rushed into battle, she would spend hours analyzing terrain, studying enemy movement patterns, and identifying weaknesses in their supply lines. Now trapped in a 10 by 8 foot space, she applied the same methodical approach to her current situation. Through the small window in the door, she could see the hallway remained empty, but the acoustic properties of the storage room allowed her to hear conversations from adjacent areas. The gymnasium was directly to her left, and she could make out the sounds of Coach Martinez conducting 6th period physical education. To her right, the music room was in session, with Mrs. Chen's violin students practicing scales. Most importantly, she could hear the regular traffic of students moving between classes, which meant her location wasn't as isolated as Madison had assumed. Emma pulled up the school's digital floor plan on her phone, something she downloaded months ago while researching the most efficient routes between her classes. The storage room's position was actually quite central to the building's main arteries, with the principal's office less than 200 feet away, and the main security desk within easy earshot if she chose to make noise. Madison had selected this location because it felt private and intimidating, but from a tactical perspective, it was a poor choice for containing someone who understood the value of strategic positioning. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lab partner David Kim, wondering why she'd missed their scheduled chemistry study session. Emma stared at the message, realizing this was the first time in 3 years someone had actually noticed her absence quickly enough to check on her. David was one of the few students who'd ever voluntarily chosen to work with her, mainly because he appreciated her meticulous note-taking and methodical approach to experiments. He was quiet like her, but his silence came from confidence rather than fear. She typed back carefully, stuck in storage room behind Jim.
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Door locked from outside. Don't make big deal. Just tell Ms. Rodriguez I'm sick if she asks. David's response was immediate. Are you serious? Should I get help? Emma considered her options. Having David alert the authorities would end this situation quickly, but it would also mean missing her opportunity to turn the tables completely. Madison and her crew would face minimal consequences, perhaps a day of detention, and they'd be more careful next time. The systematic bullying would continue, just with better planning. Instead, she wrote, "Not yet. Give me 30 minutes. If you don't hear from me by then, find a teacher." David's confused emoji response made her smile slightly. He had no idea he'd just become her insurance policy and communications relay. Emma had learned from studying military history that the most successful operations always included contingency plans and reliable backup support. The voices in the hallway were becoming more frequent as students moved between classes. She recognized several, including Marcus Webb, who'd been one of Madison's victims earlier in the year. Marcus had made the mistake of correcting Madison during a history presentation, pointing out that her facts about the Civil War were completely wrong. Within a week, someone had posted his private social media photos on anonymous accounts, edited to make him look ridiculous. His attempts to report the cyberbullying had gone nowhere, partly because the accounts were untraceable, and partly because Madison's father had questioned whether Marcus might have posted the images himself for attention. Emma had watched the whole situation unfold from her position of careful invisibility. She'd seen Marcus become increasingly isolated, his grades dropping as he spent more time trying to manage the online harassment than focusing on his studies. She'd also noticed the pattern that would later repeat with other students: initial targeting, escalating harassment, institutional indifference, and eventual capitulation by the victim. Madison had refined her methods through practice, and the administration's consistent failure to intervene had only emboldened her. The storage room door rattled slightly as someone walked past outside, and Emma heard familiar laughter echoing from the direction of the gymnasium. Madison's voice carried clearly through the walls as she spoke to someone, probably Jessica, about their weekend plans. The casual tone was what struck Emma most. To Madison, trapping another student in the storage room was so routine it hadn't even interrupted her social calendar. This wasn't a momentary cruelty or teenage impulse. It was calculated psychological warfare conducted with the confidence of someone who'd never faced meaningful consequences. Emma opened her phone's voice recorder and began documenting everything she could hear. Madison's voice became clearer as the group apparently settled somewhere nearby, possibly the hallway junction where several corridors met. "Did you see her face when the door closed?" Jessica's voice was sharp with amusement. "I thought she might actually cry right there." Tyler's deeper voice joined the conversation. "How long are we going to leave her in there?" "I have practice at 4. "Long enough to make a point," Madison replied. "Maybe if she's properly grateful when we let her out, we'll consider leaving her alone. Though honestly, someone that pathetic probably enjoys the attention." Kane's voice added, "My cousin said they did something like this at his old school. Kid ended up transferring after a few weeks of it. Sometimes you have to show people where they belong." Emma's jaw tightened as she continued recording. They were discussing her psychological manipulation with the same casual tone most students used to plan lunch. What struck her most was the complete absence of empathy or even basic recognition that she was a human being with feelings. To them, She was simply an object to be manipulated for their entertainment. But their casual conversation was also providing her with valuable intelligence about their methods, their timeline, and most importantly, their assumption that she was helpless. The recording function on her phone was capturing everything clearly, which meant she now had evidence of their conspiracy and false imprisonment. But Emma had learned from studying Madison's previous campaigns that evidence alone wasn't enough. The school's administration had seen proof of cyberbullying, witnessed academic sabotage, and received multiple reports of physical intimidation. Yet Madison remained untouchable. Her father's position on the school board created a protective barrier that deflected most attempts at accountability. Emma needed something more than evidence. She needed to demonstrate the consequences of their behavior in a way that would make continuation impossible. Her online gaming experience had taught her that the most effective victories weren't just about defeating your opponent. They were about changing the strategic landscape so completely that your opponent could never threaten you again. Madison's crew operated on the assumption that their targets would remain passive and isolated. Emma was about to shatter both assumptions simultaneously. She opened her contacts and scrolled through the limited list. Besides David, she had phone numbers for her lab partner in physics, 2 girls from her advanced mathematics class, and, surprisingly, Marcus Webb. They'd exchanged information during a group project last month, though they'd barely spoken since then. Marcus represented something important, proof that Madison's behavior was part of a larger pattern. If Emma could document that pattern and present it strategically, she could shift the narrative from isolated incident to systematic abuse. Her fingers hesitated over Marcus's contact information. Reaching out to him would mean admitting her own vulnerability, something she'd spent 3 years avoiding. But it would also mean providing him with an opportunity for justice that he'd been denied months earlier. Emma had studied enough military history to understand that successful campaigns often required temporary alliances with former victims of the same enemy. She typed carefully, "This is Emma from a P history. I'm documenting Madison's bullying pattern. What happened to you earlier this year matches what she's doing to me now. Would you be willing to share details if I can guarantee it leads to real consequences?" The message felt enormous as she hit send, like declaring war with a single sentence. Marcus's response came faster than she'd expected. "Are you serious?" "Yes, absolutely. I have screenshots of everything. I also know 2 other people she's targeted." "Why now?" Emma smiled in the darkness. Her intelligence had been correct. Madison's victims were ready to fight back if they believed victory was possible. The key was providing them with a strategic framework that made success likely rather than just possible. "Because I'm tired of being invisible," she typed back. "And because I have a plan. Can you quietly contact the others? Don't let anyone know what we're discussing yet. I'll explain everything later today." Marcus's immediate agreement confirmed what Emma had suspected. Madison's reign of terror had created a network of potential allies, all waiting for someone to coordinate their resistance. The voices outside the storage room were moving away, but Emma could still hear Madison's group discussing their afternoon plans. They intended to check on her again before leaving school, probably around 3:30 when most teachers were busy with after-school activities. That gave Emma approximately 45 minutes to implement the first phase of her counterattack. 45 minutes to transform from victim to strategist. She opened her laptop application and began typing rapidly. The document she created was titled Strategic Assessment, Madison Parker Harassment Campaign, and included sections for timeline analysis, victim testimonies, evidence compilation, and tactical response planning. Emma approached the situation with the same methodical precision she brought to her online battles, treating Madison's crew as an opponent whose behavior patterns could be analyzed and exploited. The first section documented every incident she could remember, From the initial cafeteria comment 3 weeks ago to the current false imprisonment. She included dates, times, witnesses, and the specific tactics used in each case. The pattern that emerged was clear. Madison always struck when adult supervision was minimal, always ensured plausible deniability, and always targeted students who appeared socially isolated. But Emma also identified weaknesses in Madison's approach. The group's confidence had made them sloppy about evidence. Jessica had been photographing and recording several incidents, probably for their own entertainment, but those same recordings could be used against them. Tyler and Kane often acted without considering the legal implications of their behavior, particularly when it involved physical intimidation or property damage. Most importantly, Madison's assumption that her father's position made her untouchable had led to increasingly bold actions that were harder to disguise as accidents or misunderstandings. Emma's phone buzzed with another message from David. Ms. Rodriguez is asking about you. I said you went home sick. Are you really okay in there? She appreciated his concern, but she also realized that David's cover story had given her additional time. If the teacher believed she'd left school early, no one would be looking for her until tomorrow. That was both an opportunity and a risk. She typed back, I'm fine. Actually working on something important. Can you do me a favor? After school, can you print out some documents from my cloud drive? I'll send you a link. David's agreement came immediately, along with his personal email address. Emma smiled as she realized she just recruited her first active ally, someone who could act on her behalf while she remained in her current position. The sound of footsteps approached again, but this time they stopped directly outside the storage room door. Emma quickly silenced her phone and pressed her ear against the metal surface. Madison's voice was clear. Still in there, mouse girl? We thought we'd check on you before heading out. Hope you're not getting too comfortable because you'll be staying a while longer. Jessica's voice joined in. Maybe now you'll think twice before acting like you're better than everyone else with your perfect grades and teacher's pet routine. Emma almost laughed at the irony. She'd spent 3 years trying to be invisible specifically to avoid this kind of attention. Yet Madison had interpreted her academic success as some form of superiority display. We're going to grab some coffee, Madison continued. But don't worry, we'll be back eventually. Probably around 6 or 7 tonight. Unless you'd like to call out and apologize for being such a stuck-up little weirdo. Then maybe we'll consider letting you out earlier. Emma remained silent, though every instinct told her to respond. Madison's timeline was actually perfect for her purposes. A 3-hour window would give her plenty of time to coordinate with her allies and prepare her counterattack. More importantly, keeping her imprisoned until evening would constitute a serious criminal offense, far beyond the realm of typical school discipline. The footsteps retreated, and Emma heard the distinctive sound of the building's main exit door closing in the distance. Madison's crew had left school property, probably feeling confident that their victim was secure and helpless. They had no idea that Emma was about to turn their temporary absence into the opportunity she needed to dismantle their entire operation. She immediately called David, who answered on the first ring. Emma, what's going on? This is getting weird. His voice carried genuine concern, and Emma realized she'd underestimated how much her quiet lab partner actually cared about her well-being. David, I need your help with something important, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Madison Parker and her friends locked me in the storage room behind the gym. They're planning to keep me here until tonight. But instead of getting help immediately, I want to use this time to end their bullying permanently. Are you willing to help me with that? The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds before David responded. Are you absolutely insane? Emma, this is serious. We need to call the police, or at least get you out of there right now. His reaction was exactly what she'd expected from someone who hadn't spent years analyzing strategic warfare. "David, please listen to me," Emma said carefully. "If we handle this the normal way, Madison gets a slap on the wrist and becomes more careful next time. But if we're smart about this, we can expose her entire pattern of behavior and make sure she never targets anyone again. I know this sounds crazy, but I have a plan that will work. I just need you to trust me for a few hours." David's hesitation stretched across the phone line like a taut wire, and Emma could practically hear him weighing his options. She understood his reluctance. Asking someone to participate in what appeared to be an elaborate revenge scheme instead of simply calling for immediate help sounded like the plot of a bad teen movie. But Emma had spent enough time studying successful military campaigns to know that conventional responses to unconventional warfare rarely produced lasting results. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" David finally asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Emma could hear background noise suggesting he was still in the school building, probably hiding in an empty classroom to have this conversation privately. His willingness to even continue the discussion told her she had a chance to recruit him properly. "I need you to be my communications hub," Emma explained, her voice calm and measured despite her circumstances. "There are other students Madison has targeted, and they've never had a chance to coordinate their response. Right now she thinks she has me isolated and helpless, which means she's not watching her back. We can use that overconfidence against her." She could hear David moving, probably finding a more secure location. Emma needed to demonstrate leadership that would restore her allies' confidence in the possibility of victory. She crafted her response to address each concern specifically, while reinforcing the strategic advantages they'd developed. "Tell them this. We have more evidence than any previous case, better coordination than Madison has ever faced, and perfect timing because she thinks she's already won. Her overconfidence is our opportunity. Rebecca's family can't be threatened if Madison is facing criminal charges. Alex's story inspires others who need protection. Marcus gets justice instead of just hoping someone else will care. We do this together, or we stay victims forever." Emma's tactical analysis was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the storage room. Multiple voices carried through the walls, and she recognized Madison's distinctive laugh echoing down the hallway. They were returning earlier than expected, probably eager to check on their captive before heading to their evening social activities. Emma quickly silenced her phone and pressed her ear against the door to gather intelligence about their intentions. "I wonder if she's learned her lesson yet." Jessica's voice was clear through the metal. "Maybe we should make her beg a little before we let her out. Really drive the point home." Emma heard the sound of keys jangling, followed by Tyler's deeper voice expressing concern about the timeline. "Coach wants us at the party by 7. We don't have time for extended psychological torture sessions." Madison's response revealed the casual cruelty that Emma had come to expect. "It'll take 5 minutes. We go in, she apologizes for being such a weird little freak, promises to keep her mouth shut about everything, and then maybe we consider releasing her. If she's properly grateful, we might even let her eat lunch in the cafeteria again instead of hiding in empty classrooms." The conversation provided Emma with valuable intelligence about their expectations and timeline. Madison's crew believed they held absolute power over the situation and anticipated complete capitulation from their victim. They had no conception that Emma might have used her confinement time for anything other than fear and despair. Their assumption of victory was about to become their greatest vulnerability. Emma heard the distinctive sound of the storage room lock being disengaged. Light flooded into the small space as the door swung open, temporarily blinding her after hours in darkness. She blinked rapidly, allowing her eyes to adjust while maintaining the appearance of someone who'd spent the time crying helplessly rather than orchestrating an elaborate counterattack. Madison stood silhouetted in the doorway, flanked by Jessica and Tyler with Kane visible behind them. Their expressions ranged from satisfied smugness to mild curiosity about how their psychological experiment had progressed. Madison held her phone in recording position, apparently planning to document Emma's humiliation for future entertainment and leverage. "Well, well," Madison said, her voice dripping with false concern. "How was your little timeout, mouse girl? I hope you used the time to think about your attitude problem." She stepped into the storage room, forcing Emma to retreat deeper into the space. The movement was calculated to emphasize the power dynamic and make Emma feel even more trapped and vulnerable. Emma remained silent, allowing her opponents to interpret her behavior as defeated compliance. Her tactical training had taught her the value of misdirection. Let enemies believe they were winning until the moment of reversal. Madison's crew was performing exactly as she'd anticipated, following their established pattern of psychological manipulation, while remaining completely unaware that circumstances had fundamentally changed. Jessica moved to Madison's right side, also holding her phone in recording position. "Come on, Emma, we know you can speak. Tell us how sorry you are for being such a stuck-up little weirdo. Promise you'll mind your own business from now on and stop acting like you're better than everyone else." The coordinated recording suggested they planned to use Emma's forced apology as leverage for future control. Tyler blocked the doorway completely, his large frame preventing any possibility of escape. Kane remained in the hallway, probably serving as a lookout for approaching authority figures. Their positioning demonstrated tactical awareness, but it also revealed their continued assumption that Emma was powerless and required physical containment to prevent resistance. "I know you're scared," Madison continued, her voice adopting a fake sympathetic tone. "And you should be, because this is what happens to people who don't understand their place in the social order. You thought you could just exist here without paying attention to the way things work, but that's not how reality operates." Emma lifted her head slowly, meeting Madison's gaze directly for the first time. What Madison saw there made her take an involuntary step backward, though she probably couldn't articulate why. Emma's expression wasn't the tearful defeat they'd expected. Instead, there was something calculating and utterly calm that suggested the power dynamic wasn't quite what they'd assumed. "You're right," Emma said quietly, her voice steady and controlled. "This is about understanding how things work. But I don't think you understand nearly as much as you believe you do." Madison frowned, clearly confused by the response. This wasn't the script she'd anticipated, and uncertainty flickered across her previously confident expression. Emma stood slowly, smoothing down her clothes with deliberate precision. The movement was controlled and purposeful, lacking any of the nervous energy Madison's victims typically displayed. "In fact, I think you've made several serious miscalculations. Would you like me to explain them to you?" Madison's confidence wavered as Emma's words hung in the air between them. The expected dynamic of cowering victim and triumphant tormentor was shifting in ways that made Jessica unconsciously lower her phone and Tyler shift uncomfortably in the doorway. Kane stepped closer from the hallway, sensing something had changed but unable to identify exactly what. "Miscalculations?" Madison forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow in the confined space. "You're the one locked in a storage room, freak. I think I understand the situation perfectly." She raised her phone higher, determined to regain control of the narrative through documented humiliation. "Now apologize properly, or this gets much worse for you." Emma's lips curved into what might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. Instead, it was the expression of someone who'd just seen their opponent make a fatal error. "Madison, do you know what time it is right now?" The question seemed so random that Madison glanced automatically at her phone screen before catching herself. "What does that matter? It's 5:15. So what?" Madison's voice carried the first hint of genuine uncertainty. Emma's calm demeanor was completely wrong for someone who should be broken and desperate after hours of confinement. 5:15 on a Thursday afternoon, Emma repeated thoughtfully. which means you've held me against my will for approximately 3.5 hours. In legal terms, that's kidnapping and false imprisonment, both felonies, by the way." She paused, watching comprehension begin to dawn on several faces. "But you probably didn't research the criminal code before planning this little adventure." Jessica stepped backward instinctively, though she tried to maintain her aggressive posture. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against all of ours." But her voice lacked its earlier conviction, and she'd stopped recording entirely. Emma reached into her pocket and withdrew her phone, holding it up so the screen was visible to her captors. "Actually, I can prove everything. See, while you thought I was sitting here crying helplessly, I've been rather busy." She tapped the screen, and immediately Madison's own voice filled the storage room, crystal clear through the phone's speaker. "Hope you're not getting too comfortable because you'll be staying a while longer. We're going to grab some coffee. But don't worry, we'll be back eventually. Probably around 6 or 7 tonight. Unless you'd like to call out and apologize for being such a stuck-up little weirdo." The color drained from Madison's face as she heard her own words played back with perfect clarity. Tyler's mouth fell open, and Kane actually took a step away from the group as if physical distance could somehow disassociate him from what they were hearing. "I recorded everything," Emma continued conversationally. "Every threat, every admission of intent, every laugh at my expense. Hours of audio that clearly established premeditation and criminal conspiracy." She swiped to another screen. "But that's just the beginning of your problems." Emma held up her phone to show a video that made Jessica gasp audibly. Kane's face filled the screen, clearly intoxicated with his own cleverness as he bragged about their successful storage room trap. His words were damning. "We got that weird Chun girl locked up tight. Madison's plan worked perfectly. She'll be begging for mercy by the time we're done with her." "You posted that yourself, Kane," Emma said mildly, "on your public social media account, with location tags and timestamps. Really quite helpful for establishing a timeline of criminal activity." Kane's face had gone completely white, and he was fumbling for his phone, probably hoping to delete evidence that Emma had already preserved. Madison's bravado was cracking visibly, but she made one last attempt to reassert control. "So what? Even if you have recordings, no one's going to care. My father owns half this town. One phone call, and this all disappears." But her voice shook slightly, betraying her growing awareness that the situation had spiraled beyond her influence. Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "That's interesting that you mention your father's influence, because I've been wondering about something. How exactly did he make Rebecca Martinez's assault report disappear? What about Alex Thompson's harassment documentation? Did he personally threaten Marcus Webb's family, or did he delegate that to his law firm?" The storage room fell into absolute silence. Emma had just referenced incidents that Madison's crew had assumed were completely buried and forgotten. The realization that Emma knew about their entire pattern of previous victims hit them like a physical blow. "You see, Madison, while you were celebrating your cleverness this afternoon, I was making some new friends," Emma continued. "It turns out your previous victims were just waiting for someone to coordinate their response. Imagine their excitement when they learned they weren't alone anymore." Jessica found her voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. "That's impossible. They transferred schools. They moved away. They wouldn't talk to anyone." But even as she spoke, Jessica was remembering social media posts and mutual friends who'd mentioned seeing some of those supposedly departed students around town. Emma swiped to another screen, revealing a group text conversation with multiple participants. The preview showed names that made Tyler curse under his breath: Rebecca Martinez, Alex Thompson, Marcus Webb, and several others that Madison's crew recognized as former targets. Actually, they're all very eager to talk. Amazing how brave people become when they realize they have allies and evidence. The psychological warfare that had been Madison's specialty was now being turned against her with devastating precision. Emma had studied her opponent's methods carefully and was deploying those same techniques with superior coordination and planning. The hunters had become the hunted, and they were beginning to understand just how outmatched they were. "This is what's going to happen," Emma said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who held all the cards. "In approximately 10 minutes, school security is going to receive an anonymous tip about suspicious activity in the storage room behind the gymnasium. They'll arrive to find you holding me against my will, with me in possession of extensive evidence documenting your criminal conspiracy." Madison's eyes widened as she realized the trap that had been set around them. "You called security? When?" "You've been trapped in here the whole time." But even as she protested, Madison was remembering all the phone activity they'd heard. From inside the storage room, sounds they'd dismissed as irrelevant because they'd assumed Emma was powerless. "I didn't call security," Emma admitted. "But I know someone who will in about 8 minutes, unless they receive a text from me indicating the situation has been resolved peacefully." She showed them her phone screen, where a message was already composed and ready to send. "My insurance policy, you might say." Tyler, who'd been growing increasingly agitated, suddenly stepped forward with clenched fists. "This is insane. We're not letting some weird little freak destroy our lives with her crazy conspiracy theories." But his advance stopped abruptly when Emma's expression shifted into something that made his survival instincts scream warnings. "Tyler, I really wouldn't recommend that approach," Emma said softly. "Physical assault would add a felony charge to your current legal problems. Also, you might be surprised by how this turns out." There was something in her posture, a subtle shift in balance and positioning, that suggested she was far from helpless, even in a direct confrontation. Kane, who'd been edging toward the exit, found his path blocked by the sudden appearance of David Kim in the hallway. David wasn't physically imposing, but he was holding a tablet displaying what appeared to be legal documents, and his expression suggested he was prepared for exactly this confrontation. "Emma, security is on their way," David announced loudly, enough that his voice would carry to anyone nearby. "The police are also responding. Apparently, kidnapping and criminal conspiracy investigations take priority over normal patrol schedules." His words were clearly calculated to ensure that any nearby witnesses understood the gravity of what was occurring. Madison's last vestiges of control finally shattered. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening. We were just teaching her a lesson. It was supposed to be simple." But her protest sounded hollow even to herself, and she was beginning to understand that Emma had orchestrated every detail of their downfall with surgical precision. Emma checked her phone display. "You have about 3 minutes before this becomes an official criminal investigation. I'm willing to offer you one opportunity to minimize the damage." The silence that followed was filled with desperate calculation. As Madison's crew tried to process their rapidly shrinking options, "What do you want?" Madison's voice had lost all its earlier arrogance, replaced by the desperate tone of someone who just realized they were drowning. Emma's response was delivered with the same calm precision she'd maintained throughout the confrontation. "Complete cessation of harassment activities against all current and future targets. Public acknowledgement of your previous victims and formal apologies. Cooperation with school administration in implementing new anti-bullying protocols. And full restitution for any damages caused by your campaigns." "That's impossible," Jessica protested. "Our reputations would be destroyed. College applications, social standing, everything would be ruined." But her objection lacked conviction, because she was beginning to understand that their reputations were about to be destroyed anyway, with or without Emma's mercy. "Your reputations were destroyed the moment you decided to document your criminal activities on social media," Emma pointed out reasonably. "I'm offering you a chance to control the narrative and demonstrate genuine remorse." The alternative is letting the legal system handle everything without your input. The sound of footsteps approaching from multiple directions made everyone in the storage room freeze. David stepped aside as two security guards appeared in the hallway, followed by Principal Williams and what appeared to be a police officer. Madison's crew was trapped, surrounded by authority figures and facing the victim who'd prepared for every contingency. "Miss Chen, are you injured?" Principal Williams asked, though his tone suggested he was already aware this situation was far more complex than a simple prank. Emma noticed he was carrying a tablet displaying what looked like extensive documentation, probably evidence that David had provided while coordinating the response. "I'm physically unharmed," Emma replied carefully, "but I do have substantial evidence of criminal conspiracy and false imprisonment that I'd like to discuss with the appropriate authorities." She held up her phone, where hours of recorded conversations and documented social media posts were ready for official review. The police officer stepped forward, badge clearly visible, and Emma felt a surge of satisfaction as she watched Madison's crew realize their protective bubble had finally burst. "I'm Officer Martinez with Lincoln Valley Police Department. We've received reports of kidnapping and harassment activities involving minors. I'll need to speak with everyone involved, starting with the alleged victim." Emma provided her statement with the same methodical precision she'd applied to her entire campaign. Every detail was documented, every piece of evidence was properly cataloged, and every witness was identified with contact information. The investigation that followed would reveal the full scope of Madison's harassment network and the institutional failures that had enabled its operation. Madison's father arrived 40 minutes later, his confident stride faltering when he realized the scale of evidence arrayed against his daughter. The lawyer he'd brought looked increasingly uncomfortable. As the documentation expanded beyond simple bullying accusations into criminal conspiracy charges, Emma watched from a distance as the same influence that had protected Madison for years proved helpless against systematic evidence and public scrutiny. By the time the immediate crisis was resolved, word had spread throughout the school community. Students who'd suffered in silence began coming forward with their own stories, creating a cascade of testimony that revealed the true extent of the harassment network. Emma's tactical victory had provided the catalyst for a broader reckoning that would transform Lincoln Valley High's culture permanently. 3 weeks later, Emma walked through hallways that felt completely different, despite looking physically unchanged. Madison had been expelled and was facing juvenile criminal charges. Jessica and Tyler were suspended pending investigation. Kane had transferred to a private school across town. The school board had implemented new harassment reporting protocols and hired additional counseling staff. But the most significant change was in Emma herself. The shy girl who'd once moved through the building like a ghost now walked with quiet confidence, acknowledging greetings from students who'd never noticed her before. Her tactical genius had earned her something more valuable than victory over her tormentors. It had given her a voice and the knowledge that she could use it effectively when justice required action. Marcus Webb approached her near her locker, flanked by Rebecca Martinez and Alex Thompson. "Emma, we wanted to thank you again for everything you did. None of us could have fought them alone, but together we changed everything." Emma smiled, remembering her online gaming experiences where individual players achieved victory through coordination and strategic thinking. "We all had the evidence," Emma replied. "I just provided the coordination and timing. That's what teamwork looks like when everyone contributes their strengths." She closed her locker and shouldered her backpack, ready for whatever challenges awaited. Madison's crew had learned too late that underestimating an opponent's capabilities was always a deadly mistake. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Emma, I've known you for 2 years, and you've never spoken more than 5 words at a time in any conversation we've had. Now you're talking like some kind of military strategist. Where is this coming from? Emma smiled in the darkness. David's observation was accurate, but it also revealed how successfully she'd maintained her camouflage. Just because I don't talk much doesn't mean I don't think much. I've been watching Madison's operation for months, analyzing her methods. She's effective because she isolates her targets and makes them feel like they're facing her alone. But what if they weren't alone anymore? The silence that followed was different this time, thoughtful rather than hesitant. Emma could sense David's analytical mind engaging with the problem. As her lab partner, he'd seen her methodical approach to complex chemistry experiments, her ability to anticipate problems 3 steps ahead, her talent for finding elegant solutions to seemingly impossible challenges. He was beginning to understand that those same skills might apply to social warfare. "Okay," David said slowly. "Assuming I agree to help, what's the actual plan? And please tell me it doesn't involve anything illegal or dangerous." Emma appreciated his caution. Reckless allies were worse than no allies at all. Her response needed to demonstrate both the sophistication of her thinking and the ethical boundaries she intended to maintain. "Everything we do will be completely legal and focused on documenting truth," Emma assured him. "Madison's power comes from operating in shadows and relying on her victim's silence. We're going to shine light on her pattern of behavior and give her targets a united voice. The evidence will speak for itself." She outlined her plan systematically, speaking in the same measured tone she used when explaining complex chemical reactions. David would serve as her primary coordinator, using his freedom of movement to contact other students while she remained in the storage room, gathering intelligence through social media monitoring and phone communications. Their first objective was to identify and connect with Madison's previous victims, creating a network of witnesses who could provide testimony about the systematic nature of her harassment. "Marcus Webb has already agreed to participate," Emma explained. "He has documentation from his cyberbullying incident, including screenshots and server logs. But he also knows about 2 other students who were targeted earlier this year. If we can convince them to come forward simultaneously, we create a pattern that's impossible for the administration to ignore." David's voice carried a note of surprise. "Marcus Webb? I didn't know he'd been bullied. He just seemed to become really quiet after winter break." Emma recognized the reaction. Madison's effectiveness came partly from her ability to isolate her victims so thoroughly that their suffering became invisible to other students. Most people at Lincoln Valley High had no idea how many of their classmates had been systematically targeted. "That's exactly the problem," Emma said. "Madison counts on her victims staying silent and isolated. But isolation is also her weakness, because it means she's never had to face organized opposition. She's been playing against individual opponents, but we're about to change the game to team sport." Through the storage room door, Emma could hear the sounds of after-school activities beginning. The drama club was setting up in the theater. Across the hall, their voices carrying clearly as they discussed costume requirements for the upcoming production. The normalcy of their conversation created a surreal contrast with her current situation, but it also reminded her that the school was full of witnesses who could support her story if properly approached. David had agreed to make contact with Marcus immediately, using the cover story that he was working on a journalism project about school climate and student experiences. The approach would seem innocent enough to avoid suspicion, while giving Marcus an opportunity to share his story in a structured format. More importantly, it would begin the process of documenting patterns that extended far beyond Emma's current predicament. While David handled the recruitment phase, Emma focused on intelligence gathering from her position in the storage room. Her phone's internet connection remained strong, and she'd discovered that the school's social media monitoring was less sophisticated than she'd expected. Madison's crew had been remarkably careless about their digital footprints, apparently assuming that their activities were too subtle or their protection too strong for consequences to follow. Jessica's Instagram account was particularly revealing. She'd been posting cryptic references to their bullying campaigns for months, using coded language that seemed innocent to casual observers, but clearly documented their activities to anyone looking for patterns. A post from 2 weeks ago showed a photo of the school hallway with the caption, "Some people need to learn their place before they get put in it," accompanied by laughing emojis and tagged locations that corresponded exactly with incidents Emma had witnessed. More damaging was Tyler's Snapchat activity, which David had been able to access through mutual friends. Tyler apparently had no understanding of digital permanence and had been posting brief videos and photos that documented their harassment activities in real time. Emma found clips showing him in cane following other students through hallways, photos of vandalized lockers, and even a short video of Madison verbally abusing a freshman girl outside the cafeteria. Emma's fingers flew across her phone screen as she systematically documented and screenshot everything she could find. Her gaming experience had taught her the importance of preserving evidence before opponents could cover their tracks. She created organized folders for each type of evidence: social media posts, victim testimonies, witness accounts, and timeline documentation. The pattern emerging from her compilation was even more extensive than she'd initially suspected. Madison's operation wasn't limited to the 4 core members Emma had identified. She'd recruited a network of peripheral participants who contributed information, provided alibis, and occasionally participated in minor harassment activities. The social dynamics reminded Emma of complex alliance structures in her strategic gaming, where primary powers maintained influence through carefully managed relationships with smaller players. But Emma also identified potential defectors within Madison's network. Several students appeared to participate reluctantly, probably motivated more by fear than genuine loyalty. Sarah Kim had been present during several incidents, but never actively participated, often looking uncomfortable in group photos where harassment was occurring. Jake Morrison had been tagged in posts about bullying activities, but hadn't contributed his own content, suggesting possible ambivalence about the group's methods. These peripheral members represented opportunities for intelligence gathering and potential testimony. Unlike Madison's core group, they hadn't crossed the line into criminal behavior and might be willing to cooperate if offered protection from retaliation. Emma added their names to her recruitment target list, planning approaches that would appeal to their apparent discomfort with the group's escalating activities. Her phone buzzed with an update from David. He'd made contact with Marcus and confirmed that 2 other students, Rebecca Martinez and Alex Thompson, had been targeted by Madison's crew during the previous semester. Both had been reluctant to discuss their experiences initially, but Marcus's advocacy had convinced them to meet with David after school hours. They were planning to gather in the chemistry lab at 4 o'clock, using the cover story of a study group preparation session. Emma felt a surge of satisfaction as her plan began materializing. The meeting location was perfect. The chemistry lab was isolated enough for private conversation, but public enough to avoid suspicion. More importantly, it was familiar territory where she and David had worked together successfully, lending credibility to their collaboration. She provided David with specific questions to ask each victim, focusing on documentation that would establish patterns rather than just individual incidents. The most crucial element of her strategy was timing. Madison's crew had left school believing they held all the advantages. Their victim was trapped and helpless. No adults were aware of the situation, and they had hours to enjoy their success before returning to complete their psychological manipulation. They had no idea that their absence was allowing Emma to organize a coordinated response that would turn their tactics against them. Emma's phone showed it was nearly 3:30, which meant Madison would probably return to check on her within the next few hours. That timeline worked perfectly for her purposes. David's meeting with the other victims would conclude by 5 o'clock, giving them time to compile testimonies and evidence. Emma would use her remaining time in the storage room to complete her documentation and prepare the final phase of her counterattack. Through careful social media monitoring, she discovered that Madison's crew planned to attend a house party that evening, hosted by a senior whose parents were out of town. Jessica had posted enthusiastic comments about the event, and Tyler had shared location details. More importantly, Kane had posted a video bragging about their successful storage room trap, apparently unable to resist documenting his triumph. For social media, Emma realized that Kane's video was exactly the evidence she needed to demonstrate criminal intent. The footage clearly showed him discussing their plan to confine her against her will, laughing about her helplessness and expressing satisfaction at her psychological distress. Combined with the recorded conversations she'd captured through the storage room door, she had unambiguous proof of conspiracy, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But Emma wanted more than just punishment for the current incident. Her objective was systematic change that would prevent future targeting of vulnerable students. That required exposing the entire network of enablement that had allowed Madison's behavior to escalate unchecked. School administrators, parent officials, and even some teachers had failed to respond appropriately to previous reports. Either through incompetence or deliberate indifference, her phone displayed a message from Marcus with an attachment. He'd sent her a compilation of emails he'd exchanged with school administrators about his cyberbullying incident, including dismissive responses that minimized his concerns and suggested he was overreacting to normal teenage social dynamics. The administrative responses revealed a pattern of institutional failure that extended far beyond individual bias. Emma added the email chain to her evidence compilation, recognizing that it demonstrated systematic enablement of Madison's behavior. The school's failure to investigate credible reports had sent a clear message that harassment would be tolerated, as long as it was conducted by students from influential families. That institutional protection had emboldened Madison's crew to escalate their activities, confident that consequences would never follow. As Emma worked through her documentation, she began crafting the presentation strategy that would accompany her evidence release. Her gaming experience had taught her that victory required not just superior tactics but also effective communication that shaped how others interpreted the conflict. Madison's crew had controlled the narrative by framing their harassment as normal social dynamics and their victims as oversensitive troublemakers. Emma intended to reframe the narrative entirely, presenting Madison's activities as systematic criminal behavior enabled by institutional corruption. Her evidence compilation would demonstrate that this wasn't a case of teenage drama or isolated bullying incidents, but rather an organized campaign of psychological terrorism directed against vulnerable students while adults deliberately looked away. The storage room had become her command center, and the darkness that was supposed to make her feel powerless had instead provided perfect cover for her strategic planning. Madison's crew thought they'd neutralized their most dangerous opponent, but they'd actually given her exactly the time and motivation she needed to coordinate their complete downfall. The vibration of Emma's phone against the concrete floor of the storage room signaled another message from David. 4:45 p.m. read across her screen, followed by a text that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. Meeting successful. All three confirmed participation. Rebecca has video evidence from her incident. Alex kept detailed journal entries. Marcus has server logs and screenshot archives. They want to know what happens next. Emma felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came from successful strategic coordination. Her online opponents had learned to fear that feeling, knowing it usually preceded devastating tactical reversals that left them scrambling to understand what had gone wrong. Now Madison's crew was about to experience the same disorientation, though they didn't know it yet. She typed her response carefully, knowing that clear communication was essential for complex operations. Perfect. Have them compile everything into shared digital folders organized by date and incident type. Include witness statements for each event. I need all documentation uploaded to secure cloud storage within the next hour. Send me access links when complete. Through the storage room walls, Emma could hear the sounds of various after-school activities winding down. The debate team was finishing practice in the classroom next door, their voices gradually fading as members gathered their materials and departed. The maintenance crew would begin their evening round soon, which meant her window of uninterrupted planning time was narrowing. But that timeline actually worked to her advantage, providing a natural deadline that would force Madison's crew to return and check on their captive. Emma's phone screen illuminated with a new message from an unknown number. "This is Rebecca Martinez. David said you're organizing something about Madison. I can't believe someone is finally doing this. I have hours of recorded phone conversations where she admits to everything she did to me. Also photos of the damage to my car and copies of the fake social media accounts they created." The message was followed by a series of cloud storage links containing what appeared to be months of meticulously documented evidence. The quality of Rebecca's documentation impressed Emma considerably. The girl had apparently understood instinctively that defeating Madison would require more than just complaints to authority figures. She'd systematically preserved every piece of evidence, recorded conversations when legally permissible, and maintained detailed logs of each harassment incident. Rebecca's materials revealed a level of psychological manipulation that exceeded even Emma's previous estimates of Madison's capabilities. One recorded conversation was particularly damaging. Madison's voice came through clearly as she explained to Jessica how they'd created fake dating profiles using Rebecca's photos, arranged meetings with older men, and then informed Rebecca's extremely protective parents about the apparent encounters. The resulting family conflict had nearly destroyed Rebecca's relationship with her parents and forced her to seek counseling for depression and anxiety. Emma felt cold fury building as she listened to Madison's casual description of psychological torture techniques. The conversation revealed not just criminal behavior, but genuine sadistic pleasure in causing emotional suffering. Madison wasn't just a bully acting out of insecurity or peer pressure. She was someone who derived satisfaction from methodically destroying other people's lives. Alex Thompson's contribution arrived next, consisting of journal entries that read, "Like war correspondence from someone under siege." Alex had documented daily harassment incidents with the precision of a legal clerk, noting dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes. The entries revealed that Madison's crew had targeted Alex for being transgender, conducting a campaign of bathroom harassment, deadnaming, and spreading rumors about mental health status. What made Alex's documentation particularly valuable was its demonstration of institutional complicity. Multiple entries described meetings with school counselors and administrators who had minimized the harassment, suggested Alex was being oversensitive, and recommended that Alex try to blend in better to avoid attracting negative attention. The systematic failure of adult protection had been documented in real time by a student who'd understood that official help was not coming. Emma compiled all the new evidence into her master database, cross-referencing incidents to identify patterns and overlapping witnesses. The picture emerging was of a sophisticated harassment network that had operated with impunity for at least 2 years, targeting vulnerable students while maintaining plausible deniability and adult protection. Madison's crew had refined their techniques through practice, learning to exploit gaps in supervision and weaknesses in the school's response protocols. But Emma also identified something Madison had missed. Her success had made her predictable. The harassment campaigns followed consistent patterns, used similar psychological techniques, and relied on the same institutional weaknesses, like a military commander who'd won too many battles using the same tactics. Madison had become overconfident in approaches that were effective against isolated opponents but vulnerable to coordinated resistance. Emma's phone buzzed with another message from David. They want to know if we're really going to pull this off. Rebecca is scared Madison's dad will come after her family. Alex is worried about being outed to more people. Marcus thinks we should just turn everything over to police and hope for the best. They need reassurance that this is going to work. The message revealed the psychological challenge that Emma had anticipated. Victims of systematic harassment often developed learned helplessness, losing confidence in their ability to effectively resist their tormentors. Madison's previous successes had trained her targets to expect failure, even when circumstances favored resistance.